The clinking of crystal champagne glasses stopped dead. The glittering ballroom of Boston's most elite society held its breathless silence as Roman Falcone, the ruthless, untouchable phantom of the city's criminal underworld, strode through the gilded doors. He didn't spare a single glance for the trembling billionaires or the terrified socialites parting like the Red Sea. His cold, predatory eyes locked onto only one person, the blushing, curvy baker, in the flour-dusted apron they had spent all night relentlessly mocking. And right there on the marble floor, the monster dropped to his knees. The sweet, intoxicating aroma of browned butter, caramelized sugar, and rich, dark chocolate was Penelope Gallagher's only armor against the world. At 26, Penny was the proud, exhausted owner of the Whisk and Rose, a tiny, vintage-inspired bakery nestled like a warm secret on Charles Street in Boston's historic Beacon Hill. With her soft, plush curves, rosy cheeks, and unruly chestnut curls that always seemed to attract a dusting of powdered sugar, Penny looked like she belonged in a fairy tale. Unfortunately, she lived in Beacon Hill. And in Beacon Hill, soft and sweet were considered cardinal sins. It was a Tuesday morning, crisp and biting with early November frost. Penny was behind the counter, piping delicate lavender buttercream onto a batch of Earl Grey cupcakes when the bell above the door chimed. The temperature in the room seemed to plummet instantly. In walked Beatrice Huntington Cross, the undisputed queen of Boston's high society, flanked by her two most loyal disciples, Camilla Davenport and Harrison Croft. Beatrice was a terrifying vision of inherited wealth, sharp angles, a 0% body fat ratio, maintained through sheer willpower and spite, draped in an immaculately tailored Chanel coat. Camilla and Harrison trailed behind her, like remoras attached to a great white shark. "Oh, God," Beatrice sighed loudly, waving a perfectly manicured hand in front of her nose, as if batting away a foul stench. "It smells like pure, unadulterated carbohydrates in here. I can feel my arteries clogging just breathing." Penny forced a polite, practiced smile, wiping her floury hands on her pink linen apron. "Good morning, Miss Huntington Cross. What can I get for you today?" "Black coffee. 3 of them," Beatrice ordered, stepping up to the glass display case. She leaned over, tapping a long acrylic nail against the glass right above Penny's signature mascarpone fruit tarts. "Though honestly, I don't know how you survive in this neighborhood selling this slop. My interior designer was just saying yesterday that this space would make a fabulous Pilates studio. A real shame it's wasted on a fat factory." Harrison snickered, adjusting the cuffs of his bespoke Tom Ford suit. "Well, just look at the proprietor. Clearly she's her own best customer. Never trust a skinny chef, right? Or in this case, a baker who looks like she eats the inventory before it hits the shelves." Penny's face burned. A hot, prickling flush crawled up her neck and settled in her chubby cheeks. She had been dealing with their relentless bullying for 6 months, ever since she took over the lease from the previous owner. The elite snobs of Beacon Hill resented her presence. They hated that her quaint, humble aesthetic clashed with their multi-million-dollar brownstones. They hated that she was a working-class girl from Southie who had saved every penny to open her dream shop. But most of all, they hated her body. In their world of Ozempic prescriptions and juice cleanses, Penny's soft, full figure was an offensive rebellion. 3 black coffees, Penny said, her voice trembling slightly, despite her best efforts to keep it steady. "That will be $12. Camilla dropped a crisp $20 bill onto the counter, as if handing charity to a beggar. "Keep the change, sweetie. Maybe buy a gym membership." As the trio turned and exited the shop, their cruel laughter echoing down the cobblestone street, Penny let out a ragged breath. She leaned against the espresso machine, squeezing her eyes shut as the first tear escaped. She couldn't afford to let them break her. The bakery was struggling. Her landlord, an opportunistic shark named Richard Abernathy, was threatening to terminate her lease early unless she could pay a sudden, exorbitant maintenance fee of $20,000 by the end of the year. He wanted her out so he could rent the space to Beatrice's friends. Penny looked around her beloved bakery, at the mismatched vintage teacups, the warm copper pans hanging from the ceiling, the framed photograph of her late grandmother, who had taught her how to bake. "I won't let them win," Penny whispered to the empty room, furiously wiping the tear from her cheek. "I just need one big break." That break, however, was destined to arrive in a form more terrifying than she could have ever imagined. 3 weeks later, a torrential nor'easter slammed into Boston. The streets were completely abandoned, washed out by sheets of freezing horizontal rain. It was past midnight, but Penny was still in the back kitchen of the Whisk and Rose. She had managed to secure a miracle contract to cater the dessert tables for the annual Beacon Hill Winter Charity Ball. It was a desperate, risky move. The event was chaired by none other than Beatrice Huntington Cross, who had only hired Penny because her original Michelin-starred pastry chef had cancelled at the last minute. The pay was exactly $20,000, the exact amount Penny needed to save her lease. If she pulled this off, she was safe. If she failed, she was ruined. She was delicately spinning sugar for a croquembouche when a violent, deafening crash shattered the quiet of the night. Penny shrieked, dropping her metal tongs. The noise came from the alleyway door. Bang! A bang! Crash! Someone was throwing their entire body weight against the reinforced steel. Penny's heart hammered against her ribs. She looked around frantically, grabbing the heaviest object she could find, a solid marble rolling pin. She crept toward the back hallway, just as the lock splintered with a sickening crack, and the heavy door flew open. A man collapsed onto the checkered linoleum floor. Penny screamed, backing away. The man was massive, at least 6'3", with broad shoulders encased in a soaking wet, bespoke black suit. He was gasping for air, clutching his side. As he rolled onto his back, the harsh fluorescent light of the kitchen illuminated a face carved from granite-sharp jaw, patrician nose, and pitch-black hair plastered to his forehead. But it was the blood that paralyzed Penny. It was everywhere. It soaked through his white dress shirt, pooling thick and dark on her pristine floor. "Help!" He rasped his voice, a low, gravelly vibration that sent a shiver down her spine. Penny dropped the rolling pin. Her maternal nurturing instinct instantly overrode her terror. She rushed forward, sliding to her knees in the puddle of rainwater and blood. "Oh my God! You're shot! I'm calling 911!" She reached for the phone on the wall, but before her fingers could brush the receiver, a cold, heavy object was pressed firmly against her temple. Penny froze. She slowly lowered her eyes to see the man holding a matte black Glock 19. His hand was shaking violently from blood loss, but his dark, lethal eyes were dead serious. "No cops," he whispered, coughing up a spatter of blood. "No hospitals. You call them. I kill you." Tears streamed down Penny's face, but she nodded slowly. "Oh, okay. Put the gun down. Please, let me help you." The man stared at her for a long, agonizing second before his eyes rolled back and the gun clattered to the floor. He had passed out. Panic seized her, but Penny moved with frantic efficiency. She dragged him further into the warm kitchen, locking the broken door as best she could. She grabbed her industrial first aid kit scissors and clean bar towels. With trembling hands, she cut away his expensive shirt. The bullet had grazed his lower abdomen, a deep, ugly gash, but thankfully not a direct entry wound into his organs. For the next hour, Penny played a terrifying game of nurse. She cleaned the wound with saline, packed it with gauze, and wrapped his torso tightly in bandages. She draped her own heavy winter coat over his shivering, muscular frame to fight off the shock. Around 3 a.m., a low groan echoed through the kitchen. Penny, who had been sitting on a stool, clutching a spatula like a weapon, jumped. The man's eyes fluttered open. They were the color of dark-aged whiskey. He looked around, confused, his gaze finally landing on the terrified chubby girl in the flour-stained apron sitting across from him. He took a deep breath, wincing, and immediately paused. "Vanilla," he murmured, his voice hoarse. "Smells like vanilla. It's Madagascar bourbon vanilla." Penny squeaked her voice an octave higher than normal. "You're in a bakery." He pushed himself up against the cabinets, gritting his teeth in agony. "You didn't call the cops. You threatened to shoot me." A ghost of a smirk played on his pale lips. "Smart girl. I'm thirsty." Penny scrambled up, poured him a glass of water, and handed it to him. Her eyes darted to the counter. "You lost a lot of blood. Your blood sugar must be completely bottomed out. You need to eat something." Before he could protest, she plated a freshly filled ricotta and pistachio cannoli from the fridge and pushed it toward him. "Eat. Please. If you die in my kitchen, the health inspector will shut me down." The man stared at the pastry, then up at her terrified, pleading face. He took the cannoli and took a bite. He froze. His dark eyes widened fractionally. It was without a doubt the greatest thing he had ever tasted. The crisp, perfectly fried shell, the sweet, creamy ricotta, the crunch of roasted pistachios. "What's your name?" he asked quietly, chewing the pastry. "P. Penelope." "Penny. Penny." He tasted the name, his eyes raking over her soft curves and terrified expression. "You saved my life tonight, Penny. I don't forget debts." "I don't even know who you are," she whispered. "Good. Keep it that way." Penny turned around to grab him a clean towel to wipe his face. When she turned back, the kitchen was empty. The back door was pulled shut, letting in a draught of cold air. The only evidence that the terrifying, beautiful stranger had ever been there was a puddle of diluted blood on the floor, and a stack of crisp, blood-smudged $100 bills, at least $10,000 worth, tucked neatly beneath an empty cannoli box. Penny stared at the money, her heart pounding. She had just saved the life of a ghost. She didn't know it yet, but she had just bound her fate to Roman Falcone, the undisputed lethal head of the Boston Syndicate. 2 days later, the Fairmont Copley Plaza was transformed into a winter wonderland of excessive opulence. The Beacon Hill Winter Charity Ball was in full swing. Diamonds dripped from the necks of socialites, while politicians and tycoons mingled under the massive crystal chandeliers. Penny stood behind her expansive dessert buffet in the grand ballroom, her anxiety gnawing at her stomach. She had barely slept since the incident with the bleeding stranger. She had hidden his bloodied money in a coffee tin in her apartment, too terrified to spend it, determined to earn her rent money the right way tonight. Her table was a masterpiece. She had built a towering croquembouche, bound by shimmering webs of spun sugar, flanked by hundreds of delicate hand-painted macarons, rich velvet truffles, and miniature fruit tarts. She wore a simple, modest black dress that hugged her curves, her hair pinned up neatly. She looked professional, but among the sea of haute couture, she felt entirely inadequate. At exactly 10 o'clock p.m., the ballroom doors swung open for the dessert service. Beatrice Huntington Cross approached the table, leading her usual entourage of vipers. She was poured into a $20,000 emerald silk gown, holding a flute of champagne. The moment she saw Penny, a wicked, predatory gleam lit up her eyes. "Well, ladies and gentlemen," Beatrice announced, her voice magically carrying over the jazz band, drawing the attention of dozens of nearby guests. "It seems we are slumming it for dessert. I had to hire the local charity case because my chef fell ill. Penny swallowed hard, keeping her hands clasped behind her back. I hope you enjoy the selection, Ms. Huntington Cross. The macarons are passion fruit and dark chocolate. Beatrice picked up a macaron between her thumb and forefinger, inspecting it as if it were a dead insect. Passion fruit. How pedestrian. It looks heavy and greasy. She dropped the delicate pastry back onto the tray, letting it crack. But then again, looking at the chef, I suppose, heavy and greasy is the brand identity. A ripple of cruel laughter echoed through the surrounding crowd. Harrison Croft stepped forward, sipping his bourbon. Come on, Bea. Go easy on her. She probably has to eat a dozen of these an hour just to maintain that impressive circumference. Penny's vision blurred with unshed tears. She gripped the edge of the linen-draped table so hard her knuckles turned white. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I worked very hard on this." "Oh, don't cry and get your peasant tears on the food," Beatrice sneered. She stepped closer, pretending to lose her footing on the marble floor. She lunged forward, her forearms sweeping violently across the center of the table. Crash! The towering croquembouche toppled over, smashing into the trays of truffles and tarts. Hundreds of pastries cascaded onto the floor in a sticky, ruined mess of cream and shattered sugar. Gasps rippled through the ballroom. Penny stared in absolute horror at her ruined masterpiece. The $20,000, her bakery, her dream. It was all destroyed in 3 seconds. "Oops," Beatrice said, offering a fake, exaggerated pout. "How clumsy of me. Well, nobody wanted to eat this garbage anyway. Be a good girl and clean it up, Penelope. Maybe you can eat the scraps off the floor. We all know you haven't missed a meal." The laughter from the elite crowd was deafening. It crushed Penny. Her shoulders shook as the dam broke, tears finally spilling down her flushed cheeks. Defeated, humiliated, and utterly broken, Penny slowly sank to her knees on the cold marble floor to start picking up the ruined pastries. Suddenly the jazz band abruptly stopped playing. The silence that fell over the massive ballroom was instant and suffocating. It wasn't a polite silence. It was a vacuum of pure, unadulterated terror. Penny, still on her knees, clutching a crushed tart, looked up through her tears. The heavy mahogany doors at the entrance of the ballroom had been thrown wide open. Standing in the threshold was a man who commanded the room simply by existing. He was dressed in a flawless jet-black tuxedo that emphasized his broad shoulders and lethal grace. Flanking him were 4 massive, heavily armed men in dark suits. As he stepped into the light, the murmurs of the crowd turned into terrified, frantic whispers. "My God, is that?" "Don't look at him. Turn around. What is Falcone doing here, Roman Falcone? The Phantom, the kingmaker of the Boston underworld, a man who supposedly ordered hits with a flick of his wrist and owned half the politicians in the very room." Roman's dark, dead eyes swept the frozen crowd. He walked forward, and the elite society of Beacon Hill scattered, parting for him, like terrified sheep fleeing a wolf. Politicians averted their eyes. Billionaires stepped back, holding their breath. He didn't look at any of them. His gaze was locked on the center of the room. He walked straight toward Beatrice Huntington Cross. Beatrice turned pale, her arrogance evaporating into sheer panic. She opened her mouth to speak, to offer some groveling greeting to the city's true apex predator. "Mo, Mr. Falcone. What an unexpected horn." Roman walked right past her, as if she didn't exist. He stopped in front of the ruined dessert table. He looked down at the smashed croquembouche, and then his gaze fell to the floor, landing on the sobbing, trembling woman, kneeling in the mess of cream and sugar. The ruthless, untouchable monster of Boston slowly lowered himself. Right there in front of 500 of the city's most powerful, arrogant snobs, the most feared Mafia boss in the state dropped to his knees on the sticky marble floor. He reached out a large, scarred hand, gently tilting Penny's tear-stained chin up, so her wide, terrified eyes met his dark ones. "I told you I don't forget debts, Penny," Roman murmured, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that echoed in the dead, silent room. He pulled a pristine white silk handkerchief from his breast pocket and tenderly wiped a smear of cream from her cheek. He then slowly turned his head, his eyes locking onto Beatrice Huntington Cross with a look of such pure, homicidal intent that the socialite physically stumbled backward. "Now," Roman said, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "Who made my girl cry?" The silence in the ballroom was so absolute, it felt as though the oxygen had been sucked from the room. Beatrice Huntington Cross, a woman who had never known a day of consequence in her 52 years of life, began to hyperventilate. Her heavily Botoxed face twitched, the color draining until she resembled a wax figure. "Mr. Falcone." Beatrice stammered, her voice a reedy, pathetic squeak. She took a step back, her heel catching on the hem of her $20,000 emerald gown. It was an accident, a clumsy mistake. The girl simply... the girl." Roman interrupted. He didn't shout. He didn't have to. His voice was a low, resonant baritone that carried a chilling finality. He stood up slowly, his movements deliberate and fluid like a stalking panther. As he rose, he reached down, his massive hands wrapping around Penny's waist. He hoisted her up from the sticky floor with effortless ease, tucking her trembling, soft frame securely against his side. Penny gasped, her hands instinctively resting against the hard, unyielding wall of his chest. Through the fine fabric of his tuxedo, she could feel the faint, rhythmic thud of his heart. He was warm, radiating a dangerous, intoxicating heat. "Her name is Penelope," Roman said, his dark eyes fixed on Beatrice. "And she is under my protection. So I will ask you one more time, Beatrice. Did you intentionally destroy her work?" Beatrice looked frantically to her right and left. Camilla Davenport was staring at the ceiling, pretending she didn't exist. Harrison Croft had physically backed away, hiding behind a marble pillar. The high society loyalty they so proudly flaunted had evaporated the second real lethal power entered the room. It was a misunderstanding." Beatrice gasped, tears of genuine terror welling in her eyes. Roman tilted his head, a terrifyingly blank expression on his face. "A misunderstanding, like the misunderstanding your husband Charles had with the IRS last year. The $30 million he funneled through dummy corporations in the Caymans under the guise of the Huntington Cross Charitable Trust. Gasps erupted from the surrounding billionaires. Beatrice clutched her chest, her knees buckling. "I own the man who launders his money." "Beatrice," Roman said smoothly, adjusting the cuffs of his suit jacket. "I could make one phone call right now, and the FBI will raid your Beacon Hill estate before the jazz band packs up their instruments. Your accounts will be frozen, your trust funds liquidated. You will be trading this emerald silk for an orange jumpsuit." "Please!" Beatrice sobbed, completely breaking down. She dropped to her knees, the undisputed queen of Boston society, groveling in the spilled cream and crushed macarons. "Please, Mr. Falcone, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Roman looked down at her with utter disgust. "Don't apologize to me." Beatrice scrambled to face Penny. "Penelope, I am so sorry. I'm a foolish, cruel woman. Please forgive me." Penny stood, frozen, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. She looked from the sobbing socialite to the terrifying, beautiful man holding her. For 6 months, Beatrice had made her life a living hell, mocking her weight, her clothes, her livelihood. Seeing her on her knees was surreal. My bakery. Penny whispered, her voice shaking. You ruined my only chance to save my lease. Roman's eyes darkened. He snapped his fingers. One of his enforcers, a hulking man with a scarred eyebrow, immediately stepped forward and handed Roman a pristine leather checkbook and a Mont Blanc pen. Roman tossed them onto the floor in front of Beatrice. Write, Roman commanded. How much? Beatrice choked out, picking up the pen with trembling fingers. $250,000, Roman said coldly. The crowd collectively inhaled. Penny gasped, grabbing Roman's arm. No, that's too much. The contract was only for $20,000. The $20,000 is for the pastries, Roman said, his gaze never leaving Beatrice. The rest is for the emotional distress you caused my girl. Write the check, Beatrice, or I make the phone call. Sobbing hysterically, Beatrice scribbled the amount, signed her name, and held the trembling slip of paper up. Roman's enforcer snatched it, inspected it, and handed it to Penny. Now, Roman said, his gaze shifting to the marble pillar. Harrison Croft, step out. Harrison, pale as a ghost, stumbled out from behind the pillar. Mr. Falcone, I swear I didn't touch the table. But you laughed, Roman said, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. You called her heavy. You mocked her body. Roman stepped away from Penny, closing the distance between himself and Harrison in 3 long strides. He grabbed the billionaire heir by the lapels of his Tom Ford suit and slammed him against the pillar with a sickening thud. Listen to me, you pathetic little worm, Roman growled, his face inches from Harrison's. Penelope is a masterpiece. Every soft curve on her body is worth more than your entire miserable bloodline. If I ever hear that you or anyone in this room speaks a single derogatory word about her again, I will cut out your tongue and serve it at your mother's country club. Do we have an understanding? Yes, God, yes, I'm sorry. Harrison whimpered, a wet stain spreading across the front of his expensive trousers. Roman dropped him in a heap on the floor. He turned his back on the terrified elites and walked back to Penny. Gently he slipped his custom Tom Ford tuxedo jacket off his broad shoulders and draped it over Penny's trembling form. The jacket enveloped her, smelling of expensive cedar gunpowder and him. Come mia dolcezza, Roman murmured, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. The air in here is toxic. Without another word, Roman Falcone escorted the chubby, flour-dusted baker out of the grand ballroom, leaving Boston's untouchable elite shaking in their designer shoes. Outside, the freezing November air whipped at Penny's legs as Roman guided her into the back of a waiting armored Maybach. The doors shut heavily, sealing them in a soundproof, leather-scented cocoon. Penny clutched the oversized suit jacket around her chest, the $250,000 check burning a hole in her hand. She looked at the lethal Mafia boss sitting next to her. In the dim streetlights, he looked even more intimidating. Sharp angles, dark shadows, and an aura of absolute dominance. Why did you do this? She whispered. You didn't owe me this. The cannoli wasn't worth $250,000. Roman turned to her, his gaze softening in a way his men had never witnessed. He reached out his knuckles, gently brushing against her flushed, plump cheek. 3 nights ago I bled out on your floor, Roman said quietly. I am a monster, Penelope. I bring death wherever I go. But you looked at a bleeding man with a gun, and your first instinct was to care for him. You gave me your warmth. You gave me the best thing I've ever tasted. You are pure, Penny. And in my world, purity is the most valuable currency there is. He leaned closer, his lips brushing the shell of her ear sending a jolt of electricity straight to her core. "You saved my life," he whispered. "Now your life belongs to me. Nobody will ever look down on you again." The next morning, the bell above the door of the Whisk and Rose chimed with frantic urgency. Penny, who had barely slept after being dropped off by a caravan of black SUVs, jumped at the sound. She was covered in flour, aggressively kneading a batch of brioche dough to work out her nervous energy. In burst Richard Abernathy, her sleazy, opportunistic landlord. He was usually dressed in sharp suits, with a smug grin, always ready to threaten her with eviction. Today his suit was rumpled, his hair was a mess, and he looked like a man who had seen a ghost. "Penelope Mears Gallagher," Richard cried, rushing to the counter. He was clutching a thick manila folder to his chest like a shield. "Mr. Abernathy," Penny asked, wiping her hands cautiously. "If you're here for the rent, I have it. I actually have a lot of it." "No, no rent." Richard practically shrieked, slamming the folder onto the glass display case. "I was wrong. I was greedy. I am a terrible, terrible man. Miss Gallagher." Penny stared at him, utterly bewildered. "Excuse me." Richard frantically opened the folder, his hands shaking so badly he tore one of the pages. "This is a new lease. 10 years. Ironclad. And the rent? The rent is $1 a month." $1? Penny gasped. "Mr. Abernathy, I can't sign that. That's absurd." "You have to sign it," Richard wailed, tears literally springing to his eyes. "Please, 2 very large men in dark suits visited my house at 4 a.m. They explained to me that the real estate market in Beacon Hill is very volatile. They said if I didn't give you this lease, my house might spontaneously combust, with me inside it. Please, Miss Gallagher, take the bakery. It's yours." Before Penny could process the sheer lunacy of the situation, the shop bell chimed again. The temperature in the room dropped, but this time it wasn't the Snobs causing the chill. It was him. Roman Falcone stepped into the cozy, pink-walled bakery, looking wildly out of place. He wore a tailored charcoal 3-piece suit, a black overcoat resting on his shoulders. The sheer, overwhelming masculinity of his presence made the quaint vintage shop feel instantly smaller. 2 of his heavily armed guards remained stationed outside on the sidewalk, glaring at any pedestrians who dared to walk too close. Richard Abernathy took one look at Roman, squeaked like a stepped-on mouse, and sprinted out the back door. Roman smirked, his dark eyes locking onto Penny. He walked slowly to the counter, his gaze dragging over her flour-dusted apron, her messy chestnut curls, and the deep, rosy flush spreading across her cheeks. "Good morning, mia dolcezza," Roman murmured, his voice a rich, dark velvet. "You threatened to burn my landlord alive," Penny blurted out, gripping the edge of the counter. "I merely informed him of the fire hazards in historic homes." Roman corrected smoothly, leaning his forearms on the glass case. He looked down at the display of freshly baked pastries. "I see you're unharmed. Did the check clear?" "Yes," Penny whispered. "It's in my account. Roman, this is insane. You can't just bully the entire city into treating me nicely." "Watch me," he challenged softly. He reached over the counter, his large, calloused hand wrapping gently around her wrist. He pulled her slightly closer, his thumb tracing the soft skin of her pulse point. "I told you last night, Penelope. You are mine to protect now. Anyone who disrespects you disrespects me. And in my world, disrespect is paid for in blood." Penny shivered, a conflicting mix of terror and undeniable heavy desire pooling in her stomach. No one had ever protected her. No one had ever looked at her soft, curvy body and seen a treasure instead of a flaw. "Now," Roman said, his eyes flicking to the tray of cupcakes, "I came for breakfast. What do you recommend?" For the next 2 weeks, the Whisk and Rose transformed from a struggling pariah into the most protected fortress in Boston. Roman visited every single morning. He would clear out the line of customers simply by stepping out of his car. He sat at the small wrought-iron table by the window, sipping black coffee and eating whatever Penny placed in front of him. He was a ruthless, terrifying kingpin, but he ate her strawberry shortcake with a reverence that made Penny's heart flutter. The elite snobs of Beacon Hill changed their tune overnight. Terrified of Falcone's wrath, the socialites began flocking to the bakery. Camilla Davenport bought 6 cupcakes for a book club and practically bowed to Penny on her way out. But Roman wasn't just protecting her, he was courting her. He didn't bring her flowers. Instead, he brought her security. He replaced her broken alley door with military-grade steel. He installed state-of-the-art cameras. And every time he looked at her, his eyes devoured her curves with a hunger that left Penny breathless. One rainy Tuesday evening, just as Penny was locking up the shop, Roman pulled her against his chest in the shadows of the back kitchen. His hands gripped her plush hips, pulling her flush against his hard, muscular frame. "Roman," she breathed, her hands resting on his broad chest. "You're beautiful," he rasped, burying his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling the scent of vanilla and sugar. "So soft, so perfect. Don't ever let those starved, miserable women make you feel anything less than a goddess." He kissed her, then a searing, possessive, earth-shattering kiss that tasted of dark coffee and danger. Penny melted against him, surrendering to the terrifying thrill of being loved by a monster. But a monster's love always attracts other monsters. 3 days later, Roman was called away to New York to settle a union dispute at the docks. He had left 2 guards across the street, but they couldn't stop a legitimate customer from walking through the front door. The bell chimed at noon. The man who walked in didn't wear a bespoke Italian suit like Roman. He wore a heavy tweed coat, a flat cap, and a smile that didn't reach his cold, dead, pale blue eyes. He was Declan O'Shea, the ruthless head of the Southie Irish mob and Roman Falcone's most bitter, bloodthirsty rival. Declan walked up to the counter, his eyes sweeping over the quaint bakery, before landing on Penny. He smiled, revealing a gold tooth. "So," Declan purred, his thick Irish brogue dripping with malice, "you're the little baker who managed to slip a leash around the great Roman Falcone's neck." Penny's blood ran cold. She slowly reached under the counter, her fingers brushing the panic button Roman had installed just days prior. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice tight. Declan reached into his coat. Penny braced herself, but he merely pulled out a single dead black rose and laid it gently on the glass display case directly over her signature mascarpone tarts. "Tell Falcone," Declan whispered, leaning in so close Penny could smell the stale whiskey on his breath, "that a man with a weakness is a man who bleeds. He took the docks from me last year. I think it's only fair I take his most prized possession in return." Declan tapped the glass, twice gave her a chilling wink, and walked out of the bakery. Penny stood, frozen, the black rose sitting on the counter, like a death sentence. The fairy tale was over. The Mafia war had just arrived at her doorstep. The second Penny's trembling finger pressed the panic button hidden beneath the register, the front doors of the bakery were thrown open. 2 of Roman's elite guards, Leo and Dante, burst into the shop, their weapons drawn and eyes scanning for a threat. But the street was empty, save for the freezing rain turning to sleet. Declan O'Shea was a ghost, leaving nothing behind but the chilling scent of stale whiskey and the dead black rose resting on the glass display case. When Roman received the call, he was sitting in a mahogany boardroom in Manhattan, surrounded by the heads of the 5 families. According to the legends whispered later, the untouchable Roman Falcone didn't excuse himself. He simply stood up, kicked his leather chair so hard it shattered against the wall, and walked out without a single word. He was back in Boston in under 2 hours, his private jet cutting through the storm like a blade. When Roman barged into the back kitchen of the Whisk and Rose, he looked like a man possessed by a demon. His tie was discarded, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar, and his dark eyes were wide with a frantic, lethal terror. Penny was sitting on a flour sack stool, wrapped in a blanket Leo had found, clutching a mug of tea. "Roman," she breathed, standing up. He crossed the kitchen in 2 massive strides, wrapping his arms around her so tightly it knocked the breath from her lungs. He buried his face in her chestnut curls, his large hands frantically mapping her back, her waist, her arms checking for any sign of injury. He was shaking. The most feared man on the eastern seaboard was trembling against her soft curves. "I'm okay," she whispered, dropping her tea to wrap her arms around his broad, rigid shoulders. "I'm okay." He just talked. "He breathed your air," Roman growled, pulling back to frame her face with his large hands. His thumbs stroked her cheekbones, his eyes burning with a violent, possessive fury. "He looked at you. He threatened what is mine. I am going to tear his heart out of his chest while he watches." Roman immediately ordered the bakery closed. Within an hour, Penny was moved to his fortress, a sprawling triplex penthouse overlooking the Boston skyline, fortified with bulletproof glass and biometric locks. For 3 days, she lived in a gilded cage of imported marble and cold leather. Roman rarely slept. He spent hours in his study, orchestrating a brutal, systematic dismantling of Declan O'Shea's operations. Warehouses were raided, cargo ships were seized. The streets of Southie whispered that Falcone had finally lost his mind, waging a scorched earth war over a baker. Penny, meanwhile, felt her anxiety twisting into suffocating knots. She missed her bakery. She missed the smell of yeast and vanilla, the warmth of the ovens. The penthouse smelled of expensive cologne old Scotch and impending violence. On the 4th afternoon, while Roman was out interrogating one of Declan's lieutenants, the secure phone on the kitchen island rang. Penny stared at it. Only Roman and his top men had this number. Hesitantly, she picked it up. "Hello. Penelope, please, you have to help me." A woman's voice shrieked thick with hysterical sobbing. Penny frowned, her grip tightening on the receiver. "Beatrice, how did you get this number?" Beatrice Huntington Cross was weeping, a wet, pathetic sound. "One of Roman's men. I paid him everything I had left just to make this call. Penelope, you have to come to the bakery. Right now. Please." "I can't leave the penthouse, Beatrice. And why on earth would I help you?" "Because they have Camilla and Harrison." Beatrice sobbed, her voice breaking. "Declan O'Shea's men. They dragged us into the alley behind your shop. They think we're still connected to you because of the charity ball. They said if you don't come in the next 20 minutes, they're going to kill them, and then they are going to burn your bakery to the ground. Penelope, I beg of you. I know I was cruel, but we are going to die." Penny's blood ran ice cold. She dropped the phone. The bakery, her grandmother's recipes, the vintage ovens, her entire life's work about to be reduced to ashes because of a Mafia war she never asked to be part of. She ran to the front door where Leo was stationed. "Leo, we have to go to the bakery. Right now." Leo crossed his arms, his face impassive. "Boss gave strict orders, Miss Gallagher. You don't leave this floor until O'Shea is dead. They are going to burn my shop down." Penny pleaded, tears welling in her eyes. "Leo, please. You're armed. Take 3 other men. Just drive me there so we can stop them. If Roman's men are guarding the street, why haven't they called it in?" Leo frowned, tapping his earpiece. "Command, this is Leo. Report status at the bakery." Static. He tried again. "Command, report." More static. Leo's expression hardened. "Let's go." They took an armored SUV tearing through the rain-slicked streets of Beacon Hill. When they pulled up to Charles Street, it was eerily quiet. The 2 guards Roman had stationed outside were gone. "Stay in the car," Leo commanded, drawing his weapon. He stepped out into the freezing rain, moving tactically toward the alleyway. Penny pressed her hands against the tinted glass, her heart hammering in her throat. She watched Leo disappear into the shadows of the brick alley. A heavy silence stretched for 1 agonizing minute. 2. Then the sickening thud of a suppressed gunshot shattered the quiet. Penny screamed as Leo's body was violently thrown out of the alley, collapsing onto the cobblestones. Before she could even reach for the door handle, the locks of the SUV clicked open. The driver's side door was yanked open, and the driver was pulled out by his throat. The back door slid open, letting in a blast of freezing rain and the stench of cigarette smoke. A massive man with a scarred jaw grabbed Penny by the hair, dragging her out of the luxurious leather seats and onto the wet street. "Don't scream, sweetheart," the man hissed, pressing the cold barrel of a gun against her ribs. As she was hauled to her feet, Penny saw Beatrice Huntington Cross stepping out of the shadows of the bakery's awning. The socialite was shivering, clutching a designer trench coat around her thin frame. She wasn't crying. There was no Camilla, no Harrison. It had all been a lie. "I'm sorry, Penelope," Beatrice said, her voice trembling, but devoid of genuine remorse. "Declan promised to return my money. He promised to restore my accounts if I got you out of the penthouse. You took everything from me. It's only fair." Penny stared at the woman in absolute horrified disbelief. The elite snob hadn't just mocked her. She had sold her to a monster to buy back her country club membership. "You're a coward, Beatrice." Penny spat, finding a sudden fiery surge of Southie bravery in her chest. Beatrice flinched, looking away. Declan's men shoved Penny into the back of a rusted, unmarked van. The doors slammed shut, plunging her into total darkness as the vehicle sped away, taking her straight into the heart of the underworld. The warehouse at the edge of the Boston harbor smelled of rotting fish rust and salt. Penny was tied to a rigid wooden chair in the center of the vast, echoing space. Her wrists burned where the rough rope dug into her soft skin. Above her, a single halogen bulb swung on a wire, casting long, nightmarish shadows across the concrete floor. Declan O'Shea paced in front of her, smoking a cigar. He had a sick, triumphant grin plastered across his face. Dozens of his heavily armed men guarded the catwalks, the doors, and the windows. It was an impenetrable fortress. "You know I expected Falcone's great weakness to be a supermodel." Declan sneered, stopping to inspect her. He reached out cruelly, pinching her soft, rosy cheek. "Not a plump little pastry chef. But I suppose a man with a cold heart just wants something soft to warm his bed." Penny turned her face away, glaring at him with a fierce, burning defiance that surprised even herself. "When he finds you, he's going to make you beg for a quick death." Declan laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "When he finds me, he'll be walking into a crossfire. I've got 30 men aimed at every entrance. He'll die the second he steps through those doors, and then I'm going to send you back to Beacon Hill in a pine box." Just as the words left his mouth, the heavy steel doors on the far side of the warehouse didn't just open, they exploded. A deafening shockwave ripped through the building, shattering the high windows and showering the floor in jagged glass. Smoke and fire billowed into the warehouse. Declan's men shouted in panic, raising their assault rifles. Through the thick, swirling smoke, a figure emerged. Roman Falcone didn't come with an army. He didn't sneak in through the back. He walked straight through the front door, the flames of the explosion framing him like the devil himself ascending from hell. He was wearing his bespoke black suit, twin matte black handguns in his grip. his face a terrifying mask of absolute unhinged wrath. "Kill him!" Declan shrieked, scrambling backward. The warehouse erupted into a deafening roar of gunfire, but Roman moved with a supernatural lethal grace. He didn't take cover. He advanced a phantom, slipping through the rain of bullets. He fired with terrifying precision. One shot, one kill. Bodies dropped from the catwalks. Men collapsed by the crates. It wasn't a firefight. It was an execution. Penny squeezed her eyes shut, screaming as a stray bullet shattered the concrete near her chair. When she opened her eyes, Roman was halfway across the room, leaving a trail of bodies in his wake. Blood was dripping from a graze on his cheek, his suit torn, but his dark eyes were locked entirely on her. Panic seized Declan. Seeing his men decimated by a single enraged apex predator, he grabbed Penny by the hair, hauling her up, along with the heavy chair. He pressed his gun hard against her temple. "Drop 'em, Falcone!" Declan screamed, his voice cracking with terror. "Drop the guns or I blow her brains out right now." Roman stopped dead. He was 30 feet away. The remaining gunfire ceased, leaving only the sound of groaning men and the crackle of the fire by the entrance. Roman's chest heaved, his eyes dark, bottomless pits of violence. He looked at the gun pressed to Penny's head, and a terrifying calm washed over his features. Slowly, deliberately, Roman let his handgun slip from his fingers. They clattered onto the concrete. "Let her go, Declan," Roman said, his voice dangerously soft, carrying perfectly across the echoing room. "This is between you and me." "Kneel," Declan ordered, his hand shaking so violently the barrel tapped against Penny's skull. "Kneel, you arrogant bastard." Roman Falcone, the King of Boston, slowly sank to his knees on the bloody concrete floor. He didn't break eye contact with Declan. "Now what?" Roman taunted softly. "You shoot me, and then what? My syndicate will hunt you to the ends of the earth. Let the girl walk. Take the docks." Declan grinned, a hysterical, manic expression. "I'll take the docks, and I'll take the pleasure of watching you die." Declan shifted his aim, moving the gun from Penny's temple to point it directly at Roman's chest. It was a fatal, split-second mistake. In the fraction of a moment the gun left her head, Penny threw her entire body weight backward. The heavy wooden chair smashed into Declan's shins. He yelped, stumbling backward and firing a wild shot into the ceiling. Before Declan could recover, Roman moved. He didn't reach for his dropped guns. With terrifying speed, he lunged forward, drawing a sleek black combat knife from an ankle sheath. He closed the 30-foot gap in a heartbeat. Roman crashed into Declan, driving him into the concrete. The Irish mob boss didn't even have time to scream. Roman drove the blade into Declan's chest with a brutal, visceral finality. Silence fell over the warehouse. Once again. Roman stood up, chest heaving, his pristine suit ruined with blood and dirt. He dropped the knife and immediately rushed to Penny, who was lying on her side, tangled in the broken chair. "Penny!" He gasped, his voice cracking. He ripped the ropes from her wrists with raw strength, pulling her up and crushing her against his chest. "Are you hurt? Did he touch you?" "I'm fine," she sobbed, burying her face in his neck, inhaling the intoxicating scent of his cologne, masking the copper tang of blood. "You came for me." "Always," Roman whispered fiercely, kissing her hair, her forehead, her tear-stained cheeks. "I will always come for you." He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. The blood-soaked warehouse, the burning wreckage, the bodies of his enemies surrounding them. None of it mattered. Right there, amid the carnage, the monster dropped to his knees for the 3rd time. But this time, it wasn't out of respect. It wasn't to surrender. Roman reached into the pocket of his ruined vest and pulled out a velvet box. He popped it open, revealing a flawless 10-carat, cushion-cut diamond that caught the harsh light of the swinging bulb. I told you your life belongs to me, Roman said, his dark eyes softening into something fiercely tender. But I was wrong. My life belongs to you. Marry me, Penelope. Let me spend the rest of my miserable, violent life worshipping the ground you walk on. Penny looked at the ruthless Mafia boss, kneeling in the blood of his enemies, offering her his heart. She didn't hesitate. She threw her arms around his neck, pulling his lips to hers in a desperate, passionate kiss. Yes, she whispered against his mouth. Yes. 6 months later, the Whisk and Rose reopened its doors. But it wasn't just a quaint little shop anymore. It had expanded, taking over the entire block of Beacon Hill, funded by a silent, very wealthy partner. Penny stood behind the massive marble counter, wearing a custom silk apron, over a designer dress, sliding a tray of fresh macarons into the display case. A massive diamond weighed down her left hand. The bell chimed. Beatrice Huntington Cross walked in, wearing a drab, off-the-rack coat, looking 10 years older. After her betrayal, Roman had systematically stripped her of every remaining asset. She was no longer society royalty. She was bankrupt, forced to take a job as a personal assistant to one of Camilla's friends, just to afford rent in a tiny apartment outside the city. Beatrice approached the counter, her eyes lowered to the floor. One black coffee, please, Mrs. Falcone. Penny smiled a soft, sweet smile that carried the absolute, unshakable weight of the entire Boston underworld. Of course, Beatrice, Penny said, handing her a paper cup. That will be $12. Beatrice handed over the crumpled bills, keeping her head, bowed and hurried out of the shop. Penny wiped her hands on a towel and turned around. Roman was leaning against the doorway of the back kitchen, wearing a pristine charcoal suit, his dark eyes watching her with an obsessive, burning devotion. He walked over, wrapping his arms around her waist, pulling her plush curves back against his chest. "You're a terrifying woman, mia dolcezza," he murmured, pressing a kiss behind her ear. Penny leaned back into the embrace of the city's most lethal predator, closing her eyes as the smell of browned butter and vanilla filled the air. "I learned from the best," she whispered. "And in Beacon Hill, nobody ever dared to mock the Chubby baker again." Did Penny's sweet revenge satisfy your craving for drama? The contrast between a ruthless Mafia kingpin and a soft, kind-hearted baker proves that true power isn't about fitting into society's mold. It's about the people who are willing to burn the world down to protect you. If you loved this intense, twist-filled romance, hit that like button. Right now, share this video with your friends who love a good Mafia romance, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more gripping, real-life inspired stories of love, betrayal, and ultimate revenge. Drop a comment below. What would you have done to Beatrice?